Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode. Today's episode is a simple one, and I just wanted to talk about something I feel that the future cannot avoid. And so in the subtitle I've written the smiles and frowns of the future. And so two ideas that arose to me, two approaches that are important to acknowledge are multiple singularities and singular multiplicities. You see, when I look at this world of ours, this life, I think about it in the sense that after a very long time, a part of the planet separated from itself. It began walking upon itself, and then it began being conscious that it is walking upon itself, and that's where we are. And when we look at human beings have what I call the principle universal philosophy. You know, there was a time where I thought the impressions I got from the world were the world. It took me a while to realize that the mind is simulating its film upon reality. And for those people who take the mind seriously, I term that they are more in their inner realms. And for those who realize that regardless of how their mind, like an instrument, is playing a song, playing a tune, there is a space before their mind. And so the relationship with that space before the mind is where the idea of the singular comes, you know. So first thing I want to share is that in understanding anything, we use the idea of understanding to tackle fear in some sense. That means this human creature looks at this world, it finds the known and the unknown, and it in some sense knows some things, but when it really looks at the whole picture, it is too big to know it completely. And so there is moments of overwhelmment, moments of intensity, moments in life where the person doesn't know how the future is going to arrive or how they will arrive at the future, you know, or even if there will be a future for the species. So this notion of the concept context comes in when we're trying to understand something, and the most important thing is to realize if the concept or the context is dynamic or static. What that means is it moving or is it still? And when I think about the concept of the singular, there is actually a sort of static component to it. So let me say it this way, that right now I am a human being in a world. The human is the concept, and how the world is being is the context. If I look at it from the trio of, this is very traditional, it's considered body, mind, soul, or if you're more secular, you can choose to see it as body, speech, mind, speech and mind. You know, you can choose to see the mind as the unknown factor and see speech as the bridge between the body and the mind, or you can choose to see the soul as the unknown factor and the mind is the bridge between the body and the soul. So in the relationship of the body, if I was to consider a body and think about its progression, there was first the world, then a self arose, a separation came, and then it's going to go back into the world. That means our body, the destiny of physical embodiment, or whatever is going on with our biology, it's like stardust has, or the periodic table has reincarnated. or it's constantly reincarnating. In some sense, we're made of stardust. So it's as if there is an elemental constitution in a very unique, borderline divine way. And this unique elemental individualism returns back as if the body is a wave, and this wave submerges back into the ocean. So when we look at the body, there is a sort of singularity of world, then there is a separation. Through the idea of the self comes multiplicity. That means in order for us to have the number 2, we need to have the number 1. So there needs to be the first duality of the 0-1 idea, where there's just space, there's something in it, and then that thing that's in the space has a relationship with its own reflection, and then it becomes dual, and then the duality can be repeated infinitely. So in some sense, in order to access infinity, we need to have the void, and then we need to have the void and the singular duality. So there needs to be something here for this to have a relationship with reality in order for us to be able to consider it multiple. You know, the thing about singularity, the concept of something being singular, is that it doesn't really need an explanation. It just is. So when we look at the nature of reality, we're like, yeah, it's just being here. It's just one singular world, one existential event, a massive existential event that's taking place. So when it comes to the body starts off as a singular elemental event. It separates, becomes multiple, so there's just being, and then there comes a self in this being, which becomes a sense of a doer. The sense of a doer then accesses multiplicity, but eventually the body returns back to the planet. So it's kind of like we have rented elemental karma. You know, just like you rent a car and you give it back. Similarly, we are driving our physicalism. Our physicalism is being driven by intelligence of some kind. So when it comes to the body, it starts singular, goes to the multiple, comes back to the singular. That's the destiny of the body. Now, if I use the trio of the mind and soul, when I think about the mind cannot be in some sense singular. And in all the meditative practices, you could say, or in mystical traditions, even in Buddhism and whatnot, the mind is seen as the source of the illusion. Or even in yoga, the concept of samsara, that we are in some sort of illusion of this world. You know, and so this illusion is stretching from the mind, it's extending from the mind. And so it's as if when the mind is still, when the mind is no longer searching, or it's not desire based in some sense, not that desires are right and wrong, and like various arguments can be made about that, but I'm just saying that it's as if ancient traditions were like, this mind is causing suffering because this mind is creating the position of an individual that can suffer. So you see, it's as if like we're going to the source of our individualism. We're recognizing there's a mind present in the moment, and so the content of this mind is the story of our suffering. So a non-identification with the mind is a sort of peace in ancient traditions. But I would say that the mind is a multiple phenomenon. You know, that means it requires the separation of self and world. So the mind is multiple, and what people are trying to attain through enlightenment, moksha, or inner peace and whatnot, is that this multiplicity goes towards a singularity. It becomes singular. Suddenly the person realizes there is a oneness to nature. You know, or as Alan Watts, the great Alan Watts would say, as he would say, you know, if you realize you're God in the West, people are going to be like, what's wrong with you? You know? But if you realize you're God in, for example, India, people in that kind of metaphysically inspired culture will be like, okay, you just found out, you know, as if you're late to the party of the realization that even though we're individual forms, it is one field of activity, intelligent activity. So anyways, what I'm trying to say is that the mind is multiple, goes to the singular, and goes back to the multiplicity. That means the destiny. Think of it this way: it's as if your body returns back to the world, back to the ocean, you know, and it's as if the mind returns back to a sort of endless infinitude, you know. So it's, you know, how else can I say this? It's as if like our body is something that returns back to the singularity. Our mind returns back to infinity, the maxed out multiplicity, you know. But when we come to speak about the notion of the soul, I would say the body is known, the mind is semi-known, semi-unknown, and the soul is pure unknown. And this is where it gets very interesting, that from this notion of singular multiplicities or multiple singularities, you know, it comes to an undescribable, in some sense, unconditional nature. So it's as if the soul is when the singular and the multiple both return to where they began, you know. And I would say that's where there would be no conception. I think numerical language, mathematical language doesn't suffice anymore in that domain of metaphysics. When considering a soul that in some sense is not an individual, it is not a person, it's not a persona, it is just being itself. You know, the truth of being, regardless of any, the nature, the true nature of what is being, you know, regardless of contained being, as if I'm being an individual, I'm being multiple, I'm being da-da-da-da, you know. You know, the notion of multiple singularities, it would be similar to how there's many universes where there is, and here's the strange thing, because when I say many universes, that's kind of like multiple, but it's as if like all things are happening from one moment, or many moments are leading to one thing, you know. So it's pretty much the cause, this whole thing about the multiple singularity or the singular multiplicity, think of it as cause and effect, as if the causal position of intelligence starts off multiple and its effect is singular, or in some sense the causal position is singular and the effect is multiple. Usually it's way more common to think that it's singular. This is something where I would say, if you look at theistic ideology and atheistic ideology, or secular or non-secular ideology, pretty much what's going on there is that it's all starting from one source, whether it's the Big Bang or whether it's God commanding creation's movement. So right now, it's the singular to the multiple. You know, that's how people are functioning. I would say this is the side of the coin our civilization seems to be more inclined towards. To think of multiple singularities would be a bit bizarre. Let me tell you why. Because if I think about it in the future, it would mean multiple worlds for oneself. That means it's as if like one illusion has multiple truths, or multiple illusions have one truth. You know, this notion, I gotta say this notion of the body, mind, soul, I have had moments where I've seen it as a sort of inverted triangle, where it's as if there's a point for the body, there's a point for the mind, and there's a point for the soul. When you look at it from the body's perspective, there's the mind, and then there's the context of the mind, which becomes the soul. So it's as if matter sees mind and soul, or matter sees space and truth, space, the mind is the space that witnesses matter and truth, and the soul is in some sense the truth that witnesses body and mind. And this whole thing in ancient traditions about balancing heaven and earth, you know, in some traditions they didn't have a concept of hell. You know, the whole notion of heaven and hell was in some sense, I mean, it was in some manner it is seen as states of mind rather than locations, because it's your state of mind that generates the location, that receives the location. But this balance between heaven and earth is pretty much a balance between the physical dimensions of intelligence and the non-physical dimensions of intelligence. There's a quote here by Lao Tzu I want to read. He says, "The reason why heaven and earth are able to endure and continue thus long is because they do not live of or for themselves." What he means is that there is, if there is manifestation, most likely it's accompanied by a game. And in any game, you're not just looking at yourself, because then there would be nothing to play. There would be no task to achieve. You know, so in some sense, it's as if the heavenly are looking at the earth, and those on earth are looking at the heavens. When you look at even the religious populations of the planet, they're all serving like the heavens, you know. And when we think about that which is transcendental, metaphysically beyond, it's as if there's notions of interdimensional beings, whether angels or whatnot, assisting those on earth, you know. As a body, the mind is the multiple truth, which is being treated as singular. The soul is singular. I would say as a mind, the body is multiple, and the soul is singular. And as a soul, I'm just following this triangular approach to the body, mind, soul. And as a soul, I would say the body is multiple and the mind is singular. What that means is there's been times where I've wondered, okay, so I'm being a physical creature right now, and when I close my eyes, everything I see outside of my eyes, I have an image of them inside my mind, and that image inside my mind is very easily, I can change it. You know, I can see a cup, like there's a coffee cup in front of my table right now. I can close my eyes and visualize that coffee cup go in the air and in some sense multiply, you know, and just multiple coffee cups just spinning like in a circle. I can visualize that, you know, in the air. Right? So it seems to me that there is a sort of instantaneity, as if there is a lag when, think of it as if soul being this additional dimension beyond the body and mind, but the soul, it has way more control over the mind than the body. So if a person treats themselves as a physical phenomenon, or how would I say this? As a known body, there is the multiplicity of the unknown mind and the singularity of the unknown soul. As a known mind, I would say there's the multiplicity of unknown bodies, and then there's the singularity of the known soul. And in some sense, as a known soul, which the concept in some senses should be incomprehensible, but as a somebody has to talk about the meaningless. As a known soul, I would say, and unknown multiple minds, unknown multiple bodies, and an unknown singular mind. So, and point I wanted to make earlier with that visualization example of the coffee cups floating in the air, the point is that when a person's eyes are closed, even though they have the sensation of their physical body there, but in some sense the movement of the mind is taking place instantaneously. What that means is if somebody says visualize, I don't know, an apple pie floating in the air, that visualization can appear instant. And the instantaneity of it suggests that the soul knows the mind, but doesn't know the body yet. You know, and so it requires in some sense for the soul to kind of go behind the scenes so that the mind can comprehend the nature of the body. It's as if all those beings who are physical, it's not that there is no soul, it's there's this, or you know, inner unknown witness. It's just that it's as if we have become minds to experience bodies, and most likely this is work oriented. You know, it's as if a person wears a suit to work, and it's as if an unknown universal intelligence dresses as a mind, semi-known, semi-unknown mind to work with the known body. You know, this notion of the multiple and singular is very important, because if we choose the future to be a singular truth, then there comes the kind of Hunger Games of ideological systems, where each one of them is like, no, my truth. My truth is better than your truth. I mean, come on, you know. But I would say if we attempt to see truth as multiple singularities than a singular multiplicity, I would say then there is going to be the tolerance for way more expressionism to take place, you know. Sometimes this world feels like a puzzle or like a Rubik's Cube, where to me it feels like if there's a certain algorithm, it's not like a person can do anything and then they find freedom. It's as if you got to do the specific thing and then the pieces fall into place, you know. But then there's moments where I look at it and I'm like, okay, let's say we've attained the greatest singular truth. It's like, what does the singular do? You know, it's like the singular has two options, either returning to the void or going into matter and aiming for the infinite. So it's in some sense, I'm like saying, as if an unknown intelligence had a choice of remaining unknown in a singular way, or in some sense multiplying in a very or going towards an infinite multiplicity. I mean, look at existence, guys. You know, as much as we say it's one world, this world is doing so many different things. There's so many different kinds of creatures and movements. And even if the individual DNAs wasn't enough, everybody having a unique DNA, every person's mind harbors various versions of themselves, you know. Whereas Carl Jung spoke about it, it's as if there's this collective, it's as if we are this individual consciousness, and then there's the collective unconscious. And in the collective unconscious, there's this kind of, I don't want to say alphabet, but think of it as a sort of endless types of archetypes are in the collective unconscious. And as a person lives based on their decision making, those archetypes are in some sense attained. Do you know? That means if you are in some sense, let's say you choose to be a religious person, the archetype of that sort of salvation finds you. If you choose to be a secular person, the destiny of a return to the void, that sort of archetype finds you. You know, we can even take the notion of the self and world, just simplified from the trio of the mind, body, soul. And we say that there's a self and there's a world. Now we can choose to see that there is one self, one singular self, and then there's multiple worlds for it. Or we can choose to see that there's multiple selves and they're all in a single world. That means this notion would mean a sort of a universe first, then a multiverse, and the other would be a multiverse first, then a universe. So if I was to see it as if, the ancient yogis pretty much saw it, that there was one true nature, one true self. And this self was beyond the limitations of all its extensions, as if every person's source, intelligent source, or source intelligence is in some sense a sun, like a sun. And as the sun, it is giving off rays, giving off emanation. So it's as if you are one real self, and this one real self has emanated itself into, you can say, like endless parallel realities. Think of it as parallel universe theory, where it's as if there's a version of you combing your hair to the right, and there's a version of you in another dimension combing your hair to your left. You know, it's as if there's a dimension where this talk has a lot of view in one parallel universe. There's so many viewers, you know. And in another parallel universe, there's like one viewer. I would say that because the ancients spoke about the singular self in multiple worlds, I feel that we have covered that the pilots and the advanced communicators of long ago, they in some sense landed the experiences, as if the species think of a person going through different experiences in this life, and now think of the species going through different experiences. If it learns from the experience, it doesn't need to repeat it. So I feel that the species went through a phase in early times where it was just people were just opening their eyes in the world without any technology or anything, and they were like, yo, what is this, where am I, this is freaky, you know. And so what would happen in some sense is that they would conclude that there's a singular truth. That means even though a person can go on in this life, you know, making mistakes, regardless of what happens, it's all happening in one moment. You know, that means it's another way of saying, it's like how Papa G, this very incredible human being, he said something so profound that somebody said, hey Papa G, what is this truth you talk about? And Papa G told that person, this truth is like you traveling from the beginning of your life to different locations in the space-time continuum, but then you realizing that there has been something within you from day one, from the beginning of your individual life on this planet, that has just been awareness to moment. And regardless of the content of the moment, as if your moment is a sphere, and when you're inside the sphere, you're kind of, as the sphere rolls, it's like there's, what do you call it? You're mixed with all the content in the sphere. But when the spheres, if you identify with the sphere, then it's as if there is no content, like beyond the sphere, there is no. It's all happening in one sphere of mind, in some sense. So Papaji was suggesting that there is an unconditional singularity, regardless of all the multiplicities, regardless of if the person goes to that country, goes there, does this, does that. It's like one moment is dreaming as if it's many moments, right? Or one soul is accessing a field of mind where it has endless manifestations as bodies. Right now people think they're just themselves. You know, in ancient schools of thought, you were not yourself. You were pretty much like a light beam that was hitting many things, you know, reflecting off many dimensions of reality, you know. And it is honestly the development of language that keeps us singular, because we have to be like, yo, who's using this language? All right, it's just me, you know. But I feel that was an experience the species went through, and the future will most likely go to the opposite, and then after a very long time return as if like a sine wave where there's peaks and troughs, you know. I feel that in the future, not only will cyberspace allow the presence of multiple eyes in one body, but in some sense, at the same time, oneself could experience itself in many bodies. That means think about it in the future, that people are all working from home, and so their mind is connected to this cyberspace, let's say, let's say not intervening inside the brain, but like somehow connected through wave technology to cyberspace, and the person since see his own self as another self, then he is freed from the karma of that self. So that means it's like when people see other people's bodies in the street, you know, it's not their body. They're not emotionally attached, you know. Let's say somebody is walking by and, like, I don't know, like some kid throws an egg at that person, you know? Now the person's not identified with the other person. The mentality is like, okay, not my problem, you know. But the same thing can happen if somebody throws an egg at you and then you identify that it's not you that the egg was thrown at. It was a body that was in the domain of your awareness, in the sphere of your awareness. You see, for me, it was a remarkable thing where when I was younger, I would do this thing where I would touch my forearm and then I would touch the table or any object, and I'd be like, how am I knowing that this is not what is the difference between my body and other inanimate components, right? And the thing is the nerve signal. That means it's like, in some sense, has claimed the context of the whole world, you know. I was having this conversation with someone on Discord the other day where I was saying, if you look at people back in the day, religious people in the 6th century, for example, when the monotheistic religions, for example, started, you know, I mean, it was before also, what I'm saying, like, what is the time frame, like 2,000, 2,500 years ago, some point like that. Where from a polytheistic atmosphere it became monotheistic. Now the thing about monotheism is, like, if we think about the prophets back in the day of religions, these important figures, we'd see that at the time, living in villages, there was no media, there was no the information age hadn't begun, and so it was as if when an important, let's say, quotations, transcendental event took place, it was mind-blowing. People were like, what? You know, this, what? You know, this happened, you know, that happened, you know. So it had a new impact. That means the religious people back in the day, it was new for them. You know, so it was as if they had a dimension of sincerity, right? As if all religious people who are trying to be like their forefathers, engaging the new idea. That means religion was a new idea at that time. People engaged it. They were happening, but we are still trying to act like them. You see, and it's not that the religion is wrong. It's that the behavior that is trying to hold on to a past that has already moved forward is the issue. You see, because one can look at separate religious ideology, religion, from the religious person. You see, because on some level, it's like when we think about good and evil, it comes to the actions of the individual. That means it's like, it's not words on a piece of paper don't have a mind of their own. It is the person who reads that and which the mind animates it. You see, so the divinity is in the eye of the beholder. So I feel that the future generations, they're not tasked, like, we don't want them to be like us. We want them to be like themselves in the new moments that they arrive in the world, right? This doesn't mean that we have to forget. This means that I am in one of my in a science fiction work of mine called The Messenger of Giants, which is still I'm still working on it. In it, I have this idea where there's this in the future. There's this in the year 5025. It's set in the year 5025. There's going up to that date in the history of the sci-fi novel in that abstract universe, all the religious people, there's something called the Enlightened Society as the government of the future, and the Enlightened Society has come and declared to everybody in the world, in some sense, that all ideology is artwork. And whether it is religious ideology, non-religious ideology, they are artwork to be cherished. You know, that means you see Picasso drew a painting, people don't go destroying that. You see people don't go say Picasso was full of shit, you know what I mean?
You know, they appreciate the uniqueness of how a design has emerged. Now, the issue is that when ideological systems are trying to occupy the same space, it's becoming a sort of impingement upon each other's freedom. Do you see? So it's coming to a point where human beings have to treat their expressionism as artwork, or in some sense, wars will begin over it. And behavior is phenomenal, you know, because imagine a person behaves like they were 6 years old. You know, people in the even religious people would be like, that's ridiculous, man. You know, how's this person behaving like they're 6 years old when they're 60? You know, so it would be ridiculous. But when we look at it in regards to the ideological systems in the past, we are still behaving in accordance to them, right? So the question comes that, are we here to experience the novelty of, if you're religious hearing me, are we here to experience the novelty of God's creation, the new dimensions of the creation of God, or are we here to just be the same as the past? You see, that's the thing that sometimes I think that if our ancestors somehow let's say there was a next level time traveler in the future, and the time traveler's like, I know how to wake up 2021, you know, and this time traveler goes in the past, awakens every human being that's alive right now in 2021, in some sense finds their ancestors and brings all their ancestors for a very short time to 2021, you know, from a very, let's say, long period after the development of language. So brings all their ancestors back to 2021 and says, all right, judge your great grandkids, you know. And so a lot of those ancestors will freak out because they would see that some of our behaviors have not changed since that time, right? So that means, does it mean that to honor our ancestors we become them, or does it mean that we are ourselves? And so they feel that their approach developed. You see, language is very key. There was a phase in human evolution where it was object worship, idol worship. People were like, yo, this rock, it seems like God to me. You know? And then, from an object being the source of truth, we went to, in some sense, ideology. Language began replacing, stories began becoming our truths. Now the whole conflict in modern times is that which stories are important. You know, should a person live in the story of the past, or should the person be their own new story? You know, a story that has never been heard, you know? And of course, people can be like Mr.Within. What about faith? What about faith in truth? I would say that there is a conditional faith and there's an unconditional faith. Conditional faith, you need to see things for it. Unconditional faith is unconditional. That means it's as if regardless of what happens in the outer realms, the awareness is there. It's a sort of non-physical station of attention, you know. This world is very fascinating. It is very big. Our perception of reality, what we call the observable universe, is a certain range of the electromagnetic spectrum. And what that means is, regardless of whatever system of knowledge, like tomorrow somebody's like, yo, I got it, the best system of knowledge, you know, I'll tell you, it's still unknown. As long as the unobservable universe stares at us, we cannot in some sense claim the observable universe to be the finale of human perception. It's just that when I wonder about the intelligence that is here, sometimes both my body and mind feel like particles moving in an unknown field. You know, and the significance of that makes me be like, okay, we as human beings have singularized meaning. We think having a singular approach as if there are physicists, theoretical physicists, who are trying to find one equation like Lord of the Rings that moves them all, you know. And in some sense, that is a very ambitious endeavor, but in some sense, the universe is not designed to be contained. It is designed to be changed. So if an idea attempts to contain a changing universe, it has no other choice other than to step out of time. So that means, in some sense, if a person chooses one story to see the whole world in, you actually are not in the world, you're in your mind. You're living in your mind. But if you realize that there is change, and this change commands forth intelligence that has never seen what it will see, it's as if what is more divine, a memory or a new experience, an old memory or a new memory. Taking this notion further, people have thought about souls, the idea of souls. They have thought about the soul as being this transmigratory attention between life to life, as if this attention is body hopping. But this attention is not a body, it's not individual. The moment it's like Tony, you know what it is? It's kind of like when Tony Stark is in the Iron Man suit, he's Iron Man. When he's outside of the Iron Man suit, there is no Iron Man. There is the Iron Man suit, but there is no Iron Man. There is no free will imposed in it, right? So it seems, and even if we take this notion of the periodic table changing this whole time, that means even though we're saying we're people, but really we are just elements, right? We're the periodic table's formations. So it could be this notion that the world is one body. And so there is this attention that is hopping from elemental position to elemental position. Could in some sense, how would I say it? It's as if like we're swimming through matter as the attributes. But there can also be this notion that there is multiple souls. You know, this is an idea where I think of course it's too soon for us to take it that seriously, but I feel at some point we'll wonder, just like how a person has a sense of self, and so let's say a person goes to work and they're working as a salesman, okay? So as a salesman, they have that archetype they're in, as if in that moment they're that kind of self. But if you look at the human mind, how many different versions of yourself throughout the years have come and gone from your inner domain of attention? Do you see? So that means it's like we are cherry picking identity out of an internal landscape with various options of identity projection. The person is walking in the museum. History of ontology, I would say, is really what turned on the light. Was the light turned on from outside of us? Was the light turned on from within us? So I have this book here, guys. This book is Okay, so it's this book called. I think it's the words of this man by the name of Shri Bhajana Rasaya Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura. I don't know enough about who this person is, but somehow I have this book. This book, Shri Bhajana Rasaya, there's a quote in it I want to read, and you can say it's from a man who has been endowed with a certain enlightened vision. So in this book, it says that Shri Krishna is saying the sky and the other four primary elements are in all material objects in their beginning, middle, and end stages. Similarly, I exist in the beginning and end of all objects, and inside and outside of them also. I am not therefore separated from you in any way. You are suffering from a false pain of separation due to a simple lack of discrimination. Your bodies and life airs are all situated in my Svarupa. Try to realize this truth and meditate in your hearts as yogis do, then your pain of separation will be removed. So again, an implication that Krishna is in some sense God, the archetype of God. So in some sense, God is saying, just a second, guys. Excuse me. So in this text, it seems to be as if truth is saying, in some sense, it's a field of intelligence. This field of intelligence, which is, you know what it is? We're particles in a field. Oh my God, this alarm. I think they're testing the fire alarms today, guys. But anyways. Anyways, one field, particles moving in it. Guys, I might have to make this part one because of the noise. I don't know if the noise is going to stop anytime soon. If there's people listening, you can let me know if the noise is bothersome and I should keep this episode for a part two, or I should keep going.
Okay, I think it stopped. Okay, that was a little alarming. Anyways, guys, let me take this episode, give it some momentum. Pretty much the idea of is there one intelligence in multiple, or one causal intelligence in multiple effects? You know, one truth, multiple illusions, or multiple truths, one illusion. Anytime I close my eyes, I feel that field of intelligence. You know, I don't know if people have similar experiences or not, but I've experienced in my inner realms geometrical movement. There's anywhere I go, I can overlay geometry upon reality or translate anything into geometry. There's been times where I've heard people speak, and regardless of just on some level understanding the words they're saying and what kind of images those paint as a sort of film, as if when somebody speaks they're creating a film, you know. But there's been moments where I've heard people speak, and in my inner realms I've just visualized geometry as if every person's intelligence and energy is a geometrical expression, you know. There's times where I synchronize my body's movement with that geometrical intelligence I envision in my inner realms. You know, there's been moments where I've translated myself as a geometric shape, and it's been way more easier to move through a geometrical universe in my inner realms. You know, it's as if what we consider to be the body is this unknown attention on a form, on a known form. Now, if one closes their eyes, that known form can change in the same, and it has been changing for everybody from the beginning. I mean, seeing it as geometrical is just a choice. That means think of all the types of selves, how many days on this planet you've woken up and you've been like, all right, a new day, a new self. But really, the awareness is not a shape. So it's as if we are aware of shapes, but what is aware of shapes is not a shape. In the future, there could be disadvantages to multiplicity, and there could be advantages to it too. People may feel their lives are limited through their individual bodies if they can connect in the future their mind to a giant information server or a reality server. Like, they would be able to experience many more things. That means it's like, I mean, what are human beings doing? They wake up and we're creatures that explore. We're like explorers. And what are we exploring? We're exploring for information. We're seeking new dimensions based on how the past has been contained so far, right? So in the future, we may seek, think of it as information. Here's the thing. Somebody said that video games in the future could become indistinguishable from reality. So think of it this way, that information becomes in the future indistinguishable with new experience. So people are not seeking, we move beyond the information age to, I would say, the multiple experience age. And even if one was to think, I mean, let's just for a second consider that the universe was finite. So in front of our eyes in the outer realms, it was literally, we went to the edge of the universe with a spaceship, you know, and the spaceship hit like a glass dome, like the whole universe was inside a glass dome. And we're like, no way, you know, the edge of the outer space is a mirror. You know, so it would be as if there would be a sort of finitude, a sort of end of the exploration of the outer realms. If I'm saying hypothetically, it's not the case. The world is too big for us to be able to contain it, so we say infinite. But
if it had an edge and we could no longer explore the outer realms, the only thing left to explore is the inner realms. That means the unknown variables finish in the outer realms, and through this hypothetical example, and in the inner realms the unknown variables would be left. So right now we are outside, poetically you can say, even to make it secular friendly, we are outside of our minds. We're experiencing reality outside of the mind, but in the future we're going to enter our minds, and it could be we could enter even each other's minds, who knows. There was this anime show called Naruto. This Japanese work of fiction. And in it, it's pretty much like ninjas battling it out, and each ninja has an ability. And I remember there was this one ninja who could transfer her soul into another opponent and control them. Something like that, right? And then there's this scene where this ninja's fighting another ninja. This ninja does that, this kind of soul transfer thing. And then the other ninja kicks that ninja out of its soul. Out of its body, right? And in this show, and this is like a kid's show, like it's made friendly for audiences, but the whole idea, the whole idea of it is in some sense that the moment the person kicks out that other soul, that person who did this whole soul transfer thing looks at that person and says, how could you have two souls? How could you have two points of authority in your being, And so there was this interesting idea where it was as if a person doesn't have one soul, or they have greater senses of self, and anytime there's an imposition, that greater self comes. Think of it as if it's like we're not souls, we're like soul families in some sense, right? And so it's like when one family member is being pressured, other family members come in to defend them, for example. All of this is abstract, I found something very strange, that there is this idea of, and this is a bit of a taboo thing to talk about, but I think it's important we look at the design of ideologies, right? There's this notion in at least religious thought where it's this concept of possession, right? Where it's as if some intervening force based on the decision making of the person influences them. Right now, from a secular standpoint, this is an issue with the brain, you can say. Something's going on with the brain. But from a non-secular standpoint, it's interdimensional interference, right? As if we are a multidimensional being, but we have been ignorant to it, and so when we live in a certain way that allows that interdimensionality to take place, if we're unconscious, it feels like impingement. It feels like possession. But here's the strange thing, where if we are not the body, and this is a very strange way of saying it, but it's as if the body has possessed matter, and something beyond the mind has possessed matter, and something beyond the mind, imagine, possesses the mind. Right now, the word possession is it has a negative connotation, but if I was to somehow disconnect the idea from its connotation, I would say it's vehicle. It's in some sense like when somebody drives the vehicle, do they possess their car? No. It's as if it's the intelligence, and once the intelligence knows itself, it has ability, and that ability is control. So we can say the notion of control in an unconscious context becomes a negative sort of idea of, oh no, something's happening with the person. But from a conscious standpoint, right, it becomes something where the person is in control. That means it's as if when human beings have to make decisions, for example, from the theological lens, and going to heaven and not going to hell, it's as if those decisions are animations in the moment, and it's as if a decision is like it's as if we are possessing phenomenology in accordance to the will of our field of intelligence. Now, there are people, for example, in the New Age community. I remember one of my cousins, it was so hilarious, he's way older than me, but one day he came up and he's like, you see these people who are like channeling in the New Age community, it's like they're all possessed. He shared that idea, right? And then I would say it's not per se, to me, it's not possession. To me, there is one field of intelligence. Because we're not bodies from the beginning, in reality, there is nothing that can be possessed. There is nothing that can be, maybe in the domains of personality and form, like if the person chooses not to exert their free will. That means if you choose to see something else outside of think of it this way, that it's as if every person from a religious standpoint, they are God's will, they're not them. Even though they exist, but it's like the will of the divine that's moving things. That means I remember being in Iran, and it's like, I remember like somebody doing something like skill-wise that was impressive, and people were there and they're like, mashallah, and that means like, in some sense, look at God's will. Right? So the person can have this notion that in some sense, like an intelligence beyond the universe has possessed the whole universe into motion, right? But the concept possession is old. It's like the word has a strangely old connotation. I would say it's more like the vehicle analogy is a better way of explaining it. You see, that means it's as if when somebody doesn't know how to drive the vehicle, or let's say inside the vehicle there's a driver and there's another person who's like trying to hold the steering wheel, while one person's driving, sure, like in that context, yeah, it's like the person in the driver's seat, there's an interference from somebody in the passenger seat. But at the same time, we can say that if you realize that there is no other passenger, that all the other passengers are mind forged. So in some sense, there comes the purity of the free will. And really, if you're a person who is finding complexity and multiplicity, go towards the simple singular. If you're someone who's finding complexity with the singular, in some sense, go towards the simple multiplicity. I feel the future will have way more freedom than we do right now. Right now, I would say that the species, even though I declared that after the year 2020, we have moved to the era of advanced communication, where people are no longer being language worshippers, that they're realizing that direct experience surpasses indirect ideology. But still, we are under the influence of language. When you look at magic back in the day, magic was spelling. It was pretty much like it was how, as if people didn't know that words could create a sub-reality in the mind of the person, so they took that sub-reality seriously. In these talks of mine, I'm trying to make people realize that this whole language show is going on. We're all inside this linguistic simulation, and it depends if the language is creating a sort of paradigm of movement, then stillness is the way out. As if there was a reason people would sit silent and still and meditate. Why? Because when the body was still, the mind wasn't being an animate character in a story, so the language wouldn't intervene with what's actually present in the moment. And really, it's becoming familiar. I would say every person needs to do this. You got to become familiar with your own space. That means not just with your body. Let's say you're someone who is expert in martial arts, or you do parkour or whatever. It's as if you have the earth element more stronger. Now you need to cultivate the heavenly element. For example, the Shaolin monks, as kids, they would throw rocks on their head, not on their head, like little pebbles they would throw at their head to, make sure the skull is strong. But the Shaolin monks also had to study Zen Buddhism. That means they had to understand that once you attain some sort of ability and power, it's like you cannot have the same. It's as if not only the vehicle updates, but the driver of the vehicle updates. It's as if you train, you cultivate for the heavenly dimensions, the fields of intelligence that you're a part of, and you find, I would say that's when you make nature your ally. And then it's like the embodiment, the physical training. For example, I'm a person where I would say I have cultivated more of the heaven, the mind attribute, than the body attribute. Even though different phases of life are different, but as if it comes down to the teaching where now I know that it's like, okay, the next couple of years of my life, I have to go towards the earth element, the dimension of earth. That means cultivate more earth than heaven. But those people who have just been, brooding it out as a physical phenomenon without any other context, or the context of their mind hasn't changed in some sense, that's when you need to cultivate more the heavenly quality. And I'm using this heaven and earth thing as if there is no trio of heaven and earth, hell. I'm just saying heaven is an awareness to a certain way things are, and the body is an awareness to how the way things are happen. And by the way, there is authorization, and law in some sense. I would say divine. Let's say you can call it divine law, or you can see it as transcendental authority. So think of it this way: that when children fight in school, for example, what happens? Like the principal is like, all right, bring your parents here. And each child's parent assists to the child. It's not like the parent of another child punches that child in the fist. It's one of those things where every person's authority above them handles them. So it's as if there's a chaotic being and an ordered being, and they're fighting, the chaotic authority for that low-level chaos brings its karma, and the ordered authority for that low-level order brings its karma. So what this means is that based on how you choose to see yourself will have a sort of instantaneously a higher self and a lower self animated to it. Right, so that means it's as if the unknown self and the known self. The known self is being seen as inferior, the unknown self is being seen as supreme. So when a person in their known life, something happens, and they're wondering about their own karma and how their eyes journey, that's when the unknown self, I would say, intervenes, or it's another way of saying where there is the Orwellian big brother, and then there is, let's say, the Withinian older brother, In my inner realms, I have been privileged to experience this authorization and unauthorization. There has been moments where I have gone into, like when I give these talks, there's a sort of authorization of sharing the rhythms that are found in my inner realms. But there has been moments where I don't want to say misused, but without checking for inner authorization, I have expressed a sort of ability in the outer realms, and I've been scolded by my inner realms, not by a personality, by just the whole karma of the moment changing. There was a scene in Lord of the Rings where Gandalf, it was in the first Lord of the Rings, where Gandalf is seeing Frodo, and Frodo says something. Sorry, I don't know if it's Frodo or Sam. I think it's Frodo. And he says something, and then Gandalf like suddenly gets angry, and a storm and a mini cloud appears. Right, mini storm cloud appears, as if the whole moment's atmosphere changes. And I would say when a person without an inner intuitive authorization expresses something in the outer realms, then it becomes the karma of the moment. It becomes like that. You know what it is? It's like we are so people have been so conditioned to get judgment from personalities that they have never wondered that it's like the state. Judgment is a state. It's how things suddenly change their state, you know. And there is a balance thing, right? That means on this planet, again, the whole heaven and earth thing, would think of it as if for the species. That means if everybody becomes cultivates more the earth quality, then the heavenly quality becomes absent. It could lead to an extinction scenario. You know, if only the heavenly quality is cultivated, then it would be a sort of it's as if one is the extinction of bodies, the other is the extinction of minds. You know. A sort of inner extinction and outer extinction. If suddenly the species all decides to be turned into robots in the outer realms, we still have a physical position, but in some sense, in the inner sense, we have gone extinct. There is no longer the human psyche deployed. You know. You know, even Sun Tzu in The Art of War, excuse me. Sun Tzu in The Art of War, he speaks about how the generals, when generals are at war, the general that is aligned with the heaven, with the principle of heaven, in some sense becomes victorious. You know, as if moments have different attributes. Some moments the heavenly quality is more than the earthly quality. You know, some moments the earthly quality is more than the heavenly quality. When you see advanced human beings using their intelligence to build something, I would say that's more of a heavenly quality. When you see not advanced human beings fighting like vicious animals, it's like that's more like the earth quality has devoured the moment. You know. This is why, regardless of what ideological perspective you have, the important thing is to cultivate grace with your world and as your world. And a person who feels they're incomplete can't be graceful. That means there is something strange where if a person thinks they're lacking something, they want grace rather than realizing it is only in giving it where it becomes real to the intelligence. So pretty much in this episode, I'm saying that we as human beings, 8 billion creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere, that have some sort of unknown field-like intelligence going where we can acknowledge each other's existence, and we can even acknowledge each other's experiential mobility of our existence. So pretty much we have to be considerate of the multiple lives for the singular and the singular life for the multiple. That means we have to prepare an advanced civilization with me seeing both of these angles and attaining a sort of cultivated balance. So in the future there may be people who they feel they're in multiple moments even though they're in one moment, and there may be people who feel they're in one moment even though they have multiple bodies. You know, that means imagine a person who let's say that Android technology comes in and a person has like one biological body and like six other Android bodies, you know. And so it's as if you ask that person, or let's say this is a very complex idea. I've shared it in my science fiction, but I'll share it here, where a person becomes conscious of their parallel lives in other dimensions. So that example I used of the person combing their hair right in one parallel universe and then combing their hair left in another parallel universe, even though it's happening at the same time, right? So imagine that person was aware that they were combing their hair, right? So imagine you become aware of more than one time plane. As if we are like a cube and there's 6 parallel realities, imagine, right? And so you're aware of all of them, right? So it would be as if that person who is considering that they're present through multiple eyes of their, let's say, interdimensionally collective self, that person could also believe in oneself. You know, you could see somebody with multiple bodies and that person's like, no man, it's just one self here, you know. And then you'd be like, how man, there's multiple versions of you. But then the person's like, no, it's just one, right? That could be a school of thought for the multiple, or for those who are multidimensionally intelligent in the future. Or you could be a person with a singular body and you'd be like, yeah man, I have multiple selves, you know. You think my soul's just here, you know. I feel personally that the point of life is not just singularity. Even though singularity could be a source of, there could be an absence of suffering, there could be an absence of karma, a person may feel their truth, but in some sense, I feel because the way if you saw a physical existence as a problem that can be solved, it's as if the problem is suggesting 8 billion unique DNAs, right? So it's as if at least in the outer realms, we know that we're not all the same, right? In the inner realms, sure, in the future they may be like, yeah, one presence. It's like, it doesn't matter if it's a dolphin, it doesn't matter if it's a bird, it doesn't matter if it's a human being, there's one intelligent activity going on. It's just that the human being can notice it compared to others. You know, like all other species are unconsciously being the universal consciousness, but man has a privilege to consciously be, you know, the intelligence of the collective unconscious. Anyways, guys, I hope this episode was interesting and helpful. When it comes to ideas, there is a fear. There is a fear in any new thing that changes, whether it's in the outer realm something changes, or whether it's in the inner realm. In the inner realm, we have more comfort. Why? Because we live the day, we go back to sleep, we enter deep sleep, and that's complete unconsciousness. Like, there is no self that is suffering or enjoying. There is no self that is free or unfree. There is an absence of conscious constitution, right? You know, let's say even between the dream states there's deep sleep. So anytime a person sleeps, it's as if they are stepping out of the Iron Man suit, out of the elemental suit of their being, you know, of their existence for a moment. Because there's no time, all we can say it's for a moment. Whoever you are, consider yourself as an advanced communicator of your species and help the world's greater explorations of intelligence, both in front of our eyes and behind our eyes. And I would say I would end the episode here. Thanks for listening, and much blessings and namaste.